Hey, thanks. It's great to be here, and not just because I get to get out of the Pentagon for about 15 minutes away from the Army G-3, but I'd like to thank General Ham, AUSA, General Swan, General McCuistion, Sergeant Major for having me over here. It's an exciting time in Army aviation, as General Swan alluded to. I'm proud to be up here alongside the branch chief, our great branch chief and longtime friend, Major General Francis, and working on the Army staff for our new Chief of Staff of the Army. I'd like to thank all the soldiers and veterans out there for your service, and thank our industry partners, civilian leaders, staffers, and media and friends for being here today to participate in this dialogue. In the Army staff, I got current ops up there in G3, and we'll talk man, train, equip. So I'll try and add a little meat on the bones in a couple places in order to not repeat the branch chief. So I also wanted to recognize the hurricane response by the total Army force. Right now, we have 156 aircraft from all three components. That's National Guard from at least 5 states, the United States Army Reserve, and the 1st Air Cavalry Brigade postured across the southeastern United States for hurricane response, for Hurricane Dorian. To go a little bit more into way of introduction, some of you in the room know me from different tours on the Army staff. This is my 3rd, so I can't figure out if they're just giving me another chance to get it right or why. But I'm back after a year as a DCG in Korea for 2ID, so I'll be talking about from the Army staff perspective. But also, I have a family connection to Army aviation. I'm the son and son-in-law of retired Army aviators, and they flew with some of the people here in the room, and I've worked for many of the people here in the room, so it's always an exciting environment to come in like this. As General Francis said, op tempo remains high, and he said 83%, and that's right. And to kind of flesh that out, today, every active component cab is allocated or on mission. They're either on a mission, they're coming back from the mission, or they're training for the mission. They're allocated forces. Our reserve component cabs and aviation units are in much the same boat as we look across the force. The appetite for Army aviation has not subsided. As the receiver of RFFs and continual requests for aviation forces in the fight from the COCOMs, that appetite has not waned. At the same time, we face challenges of, you heard the challenge of balancing current fleets and reaching for the future capabilities, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Budget pressures in the building have also not subsided. We have been greatly supported by Congress, and through the great work of commanders at all levels out there, we have made great strides in improving readiness of our aviation formations. But those pressures remain as we look at how we invest between the 6 Army modernization priorities, and we focus on readiness and continue to build readiness, not just at the crew level, as we did in over years of COIN, where we were just rotating crews and teams, but as we look at collective readiness and training companies and battalions. And so that's really where we're focused. And so I think it's appropriate that the title of transition to MDO as kind of the lead resourcer of Army aviation there and synchronizer in the building. I'm definitely kind of right at that nexus of transition. I kind of equate it to, I talk to young field grades and they're like, hey, should I be an S3 or be an XO, and I'm like, well, S3, it's great. You get to come up with all these great plans and do all this stuff, and it's great. And the XO's hair's falling out over there because he's trying to figure out how to pay for it and get all the people to the right formation. And so in DAMO AV, as the synchronizer and resourcer, I'm in there every day trying to make sure that we can do what we need to do to make aviation even more lethal in MDO. I'd like to start off by talking about people first. So our new Chief of Staff of the Army says people are our greatest strength and our most important weapon system, and has renewed the focus on people. So I'll start off Jen's question on pilot shortfall out there. So I say shortfall versus shortage because it's really a targeted group that we're talking about when we're talking about the pilots. So 3 things cause that. We under-accessed during some of the reduced budget years. We had underproduction at Fort Rucker during those same years, and then we saw a slight uptick in attrition over the last 3 years. So those 3 factors created over a series of year groups in the mid-grade warrant officer range this shortfall that we hear about. The good news is, how do we get after that? So the good news is we don't have trouble recruiting pilots in the Army. People still want to fly. Our young combat arms NCOs they see those warrant officers and they want to get out and fly, and we bring about 25% more in from outside the force. So the recruitment piece has not historically been our challenge. It has been capacity and production. And so as General Francis alluded to, we've been working hard, him a year ago and me currently, to resource the increase in production at Fort Rucker and to target incentives on portions of our warrant officer force out there that can fill in the gap until we grow these year groups to the right. You can understand that when you optimally form a cohort of pilots, your year groups in the younger ranks will have many more people than the older ones, and so these incentives help us keep some of those later in the career experienced aviators to fill the gap till we can grow these short year groups to the right and meet the line. Having said that, we're also working a couple other things. So one of the questions I often get asked is, so are the airlines impacting your shortfall? Well, the short answer is we don't know. So we don't have good measurements right now out there to tell us exactly why an aviator is getting out of the force. And so we're working with AUSA, MNRA, and the G1 to develop good exit surveys so we can figure that piece out as we go along. And we're also working some other improvements to flight pay focused on proficiency levels as you go up. So we're working those things. However, as you know, money doesn't fix everything. We've looked across the force, we've listened to soldiers and families, and certainly flexibility and stability in assignments, things like spousal employment affect soldiers' decisions. So we're also engaged in those efforts, and I know we got CV5 England here from Talent Management Task Force, and they're also helping to kind of shape us, and they're coming up with great TTPs for us to follow to bring us into an information age human resource environment versus an industrial age environment. The chief's asked us to focus, when the chief says people are important, he includes family members out there. And so we're focused on priorities out there: housing, health care, child care, spousal employment, the tolls that PCS takes on the force. And so we're looking at those things. As we look at training and readiness, readiness remains the main effort for us right now in the Army. And we're focused on this collective readiness for large-scale combat operations against a near-peer threat. And at the same time, setting conditions for a multi-domain force to keep aviation lethal and capable, with the end game being a highly trained and disciplined, fit force to win. Hashtag winning matters. So as I look at this and I say, how are we doing that, and where's the trade space? You'll hear many people say, oh, this is like the late 90s or early 2000s, and we have to sacrifice something to get something. I have a nuanced view to that, and I think it's more like the late 70s and early 80s, where we have to come up with the right mix of complementary capabilities to take on the fight. And I'll read you a couple of quotes that I looked up as I was thinking about this. So I went back to 1982, and General McNair, first branch chief after Army Aviation became a branch, and this is during the Army Aviation Systems Program Review before that decision was made. And the discussion was, how do we facilitate air-land battle with this air component of the land arm? And it says, the success of air-land battle then would obviously hinge on perfect coordination between land forces using tanks and armor, and Army aviators flying helicopters powerful enough to take out tanks. So then I followed that along, and I got to General Myers' memo to Secretary Marsh advocating for the formation of aviation as a branch. And he states to the Secretary, air-land battle has clearly moved Army aviation to the realm of a combat maneuver element requiring full integration into the combined arms team. So, although history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, right? And so I look at those kinds of decisions and what we're doing, and you look at development of weapon systems that complemented and got to the doctrine that General Francis is talking about, and so you say, well, that was 1982. and we talk about today's 2019 and 2028 is 9 years away. Well, 9 years after 1982, there was an assessment that said we were facing multi-layered, redundant, computer-controlled network of air defenses. We faced large arrays of ground-controlled intercept early warning radars with 16,000 radar guide or cued heat-seeking missiles and 7,500 AAA pieces. So that, and we're outranged in long-range rockets and outgunned in artillery and mass. And so I start thinking, and I'm like, well, that sounds familiar, but that wasn't the Soviets. That wasn't anywhere in the world today. That assessment was the Iraqi army in '91 as we sat there in Saudi Arabia. And so today, those of us that have fought over there over the last 20 years, we kind of say, well, it turned out to be, not as challenging as initially thought in Desert Storm, which was my first experience in combat as a lieutenant. But really, why is that? It's because of the complementary weapon systems that were developed in the decades before that and the doctrine that was formed around those systems. And so I think that we know about General Cody and Army Aviation going in against that assessment and being able to take out some early warning radars so that we opened a hole for the Joint Force. And 2,000 sorties were flown on the first day after that. And so that's where I think we have to look at what are those capabilities. Manned, unmanned, munitions, lethal effects out there that give us those same advantages. How do they work with long-range fires and the maneuver force in NGCV, and then how's it all connected by the network? I'll leave a lot of modernization to General Rugen up here on the panels, but I did want to address a couple things that came up. So as we talk about penetrate, disintegrate, exploit in a high-threat environment, we can't forget about rapidly converging and dispersing forces in that environment. So we can't have massive formations sitting out there static in this kind of environment. And so aviation's reach and agility provides a means by which to rapidly converge and disperse. And I talked about FVL being a little more than just the two platforms we currently hear about. On the current fleets and the fleets that we will have with us until we bring these future capabilities into the force, we haven't forgotten about them. So we say, well, it's 10 years from now till we see FVL, or 9 years till we see the first iteration of something. But what we can't forget is we're still fielding. We haven't fielded all the Echo models yet. We haven't fielded all the Mike models yet. The Victor model's coming online. Those are all funded, and we're still fielding those capabilities. So we're not flat-footed. We are continuing to move forward on that and getting those out into our formations. We took a very hard look at our MH-47 Golfs, our most hard-worked. I saw General Pepin in here. That's our hardest-worked aircraft in our aviation fleet, and we took a hard look at that, and that's funded to keep improving those. We're still fleshing out the training fleet at Rucker with LUHs, and you've got ITEP fully funded and moving forward to continue to aid those enduring fleets. So Army Aviation remains a critical capability and component of combined arms maneuver and a lethal part in MDO. And I talked earlier about being the son and son-in-law of Army aviators. What I didn't say is I also have kids out there. So I have a child that is going to be flying one of these machines that's at Fort Rucker right now, and I have a daughter that is a ground maneuver officer at Fort Benning right now getting trained. So nobody's more concerned or more vested than I in producing a lethal aviation force to support ground maneuver. With that, I'd like to finish up with the Chief's buzzwords now. People first, winning matters, Army strong.